In this episode, we take a plain language approach to what responsible AI ethics really means when deadlines are tight, competitors are moving fast, and leaders want results yesterday. It is easy to talk about ethics when nothing is on the line, but the real test is what happens when shipping speed, revenue goals, or public image starts pushing against careful decision-making. Responsible AI is not a mood or a poster on the wall. It is a set of choices that protect people from avoidable harm while still letting an organization build useful technology. For brand new learners, the important thing is learning how ethical ideas turn into concrete decisions, because that is where they either survive or collapse. You will learn how to recognize common pressure situations, how to keep ethical principles practical, and how to apply a few steady rules of judgment that remain valid even when someone is trying to rush you. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Responsible AI ethics starts with a simple framing. When technology influences people, it becomes part of their life, and that means mistakes can be more than inconvenient. A model that recommends a movie is low stakes, but a model that ranks job applicants, flags suspicious behavior, or determines eligibility for services can change someone's opportunities. The first ethical skill is learning to identify impact, because impact tells you how cautious you must be. Impact is not just about whether a system is accurate on average. It is about who gets hurt when it is wrong and whether that harm is reversible. A wrong recommendation is easy to ignore, but a wrong denial can follow someone for years. If an organization cannot describe the potential harm clearly, it usually means the team has not thought deeply enough about responsibility. Ethical AI begins by treating impact as a core requirement, not an afterthought. Business pressure often begins with the word just, as in just use what data we have, just deploy it as a pilot, or just let the model decide, and we will fix it later. Ethical practice holds up when you replace just with specifics. What data, exactly, and what risks does it introduce? What pilot, exactly, and who will be affected during the pilot period? What decisions, exactly, and what safety net exists for people who are wrongly impacted? This shift from vague reassurance to concrete explanation is one of the strongest ethical tools you can use because it reveals hidden assumptions. Many risky AI ideas survive only because they are described in soft, optimistic language. When you force clarity, you force accountability. That is how ethics becomes practical rather than philosophical. A common misconception is that ethics is mainly about intentions, like whether the team meant well. In responsible AI, outcomes matter more than intentions because the people affected experience the outcome, not the team's good heart. Another misconception is that ethics is the opposite of innovation, like a brake that prevents progress. In reality, ethics is a form of quality control that prevents predictable failure, backlash, and harm that later destroys trust. Ethical design tends to create more stable products because it anticipates misuse, misunderstanding, and edge cases that would otherwise become incidents. A third misconception is that ethics is only about fairness and bias, but ethical responsibility also includes privacy, transparency, safety, and the ability to contest decisions. Ethics is the discipline of choosing constraints that keep the technology aligned with human values even when a shortcut would be easier. To apply ethics under pressure, you need a small set of principles that are easy to remember and hard to argue against. One principle is do not surprise people, meaning avoid uses of data and automation that a reasonable person would not expect. Another is do not trap people, meaning avoid systems that make it hard to correct errors or appeal decisions. Another is do not hide uncertainty, meaning do not present model outputs as truth when they are probabilities and guesses. A final principle is do not move risk onto the least powerful, meaning avoid designs where the system is convenient for the organization but the person pays the cost when things go wrong. These principles are not advanced, but they are effective because they focus on the human experience. Under business pressure, simple principles act like guardrails that keep discussions grounded in reality. Fairness is often the first ethical topic people mention, but fairness is easy to claim and harder to practice. An AI system can be accurate overall and still unfair if it consistently performs worse for certain groups or certain conditions. It can also be unfair if the data reflects unequal treatment from the past, because the model will learn that pattern and repeat it. Applying fairness ethics under pressure means refusing to accept performance claims that hide differences across populations. It also means being honest about the limitations of the data, especially when the data is missing whole groups or measures them differently. Fairness is not only about protected traits. It can involve geography, language, disability, access to technology, and other differences that affect how data is generated. A practical ethical stance is to ask who might be systematically disadvantaged and what will be done to reduce that disadvantage before deployment. Privacy is another ethical pillar that tends to weaken under pressure because more data can appear to create better results. Responsible AI treats personal data as a liability that must be justified, minimized, and protected, not as free fuel. Ethical privacy choices include limiting data to what is necessary, setting realistic retention periods, restricting access, and being clear about how data is used in training and operation. Under pressure, teams may argue that users already agreed to data collection, but ethical privacy is not only about permission, it is also about respect for context. People share information in one situation for one reason, and repurposing it into model training or automated profiling can feel like betrayal even if a policy technically allows it. A durable ethical approach asks what a reasonable person would expect and how the organization will avoid violating that expectation. Privacy ethics survives pressure when the organization values trust as a long-term asset. Transparency is often misunderstood as revealing every technical detail, which is not realistic and usually not helpful for ordinary users. Ethical transparency is about giving people meaningful understanding of what the system does, what it does not do, and what they can do if something goes wrong. It includes telling users when AI is involved in a decision, describing the kinds of data that influence outcomes, and explaining what the output means in practical terms. Under business pressure, transparency can be reduced because it is seen as friction, but removing transparency often increases complaints, confusion, and reputational damage later. A responsible approach keeps transparency proportional to impact, meaning higher impact uses deserve clearer explanations and stronger rights to challenge outcomes. Transparency also supports internal ethics, because teams that can explain their system clearly are more likely to notice when it is doing something questionable. Confusing systems are harder to govern, and that is when ethics erodes. Safety and reliability are ethical topics too, because unsafe systems create harm even if they are not biased or invasive. Safety includes preventing the model from giving dangerous advice, making false claims with high confidence, or enabling misuse. Reliability includes ensuring the system behaves consistently and does not break in predictable ways when inputs change. Under pressure, teams may treat safety as something to address after release, but responsible AI recognizes that releasing an unsafe system is itself an ethical decision. Safety planning includes thinking about failure modes, such as what the system does when it is uncertain, how it avoids hallucinated facts, and how it prevents users from overtrusting outputs. It also includes designing a way to detect issues after deployment and respond quickly. Ethics holds up when safety is treated as a requirement for launch, not a wish for later. Accountability is the bridge between ethical principles and real organizational behavior. If nobody owns the decision to deploy, nobody owns the harm that follows, and ethics becomes a set of hopes rather than rules. Responsible AI requires clear human accountability for what the system is allowed to do, what data it uses, what metrics define acceptable performance, and what triggers require pausing or changing the system. Under pressure, accountability can blur because people want speed and want to avoid blame. Ethical practice resists that blur by making decisions explicit and recorded. This does not mean creating bureaucracy for its own sake. It means ensuring there is a traceable reason for major choices. When accountability is clear, it becomes easier to say no to risky shortcuts because the consequences are not abstract. Someone has to answer for them, and that changes behavior. One of the most common high-pressure ethical failures is moving from assistance to automation without noticing the moral shift. A model used to suggest options still leaves a human in control, but a model used to decide can remove human judgment and make errors harder to catch. Under pressure, teams may claim it is still just a recommendation, even when the workflow makes it function like a decision. Responsible AI ethics asks how the system is actually used, not how it is described. If humans rubber stamp the model because they are busy, the model is effectively deciding. Ethical practice includes designing the workflow so that humans can realistically question the output, understand the reasoning, and override it without punishment. If the organization cannot support meaningful human review, then fully automated use should be treated as higher risk and governed more strictly. Another pressure point is deadlines, because deadlines encourage teams to borrow datasets, reuse labels, and accept unclear definitions. Ethical practice under deadline pressure focuses on what cannot be compromised, such as data that violates privacy expectations, labels that are known to be biased, or use cases that could cause serious harm without a reliable appeal path. It also means resisting the temptation to treat a pilot as harmless. Pilots still affect people, and a pilot can create lasting harm even if it is labeled temporary. A strong ethical response to deadline pressure is to narrow scope rather than lower safeguards. Instead of deploying a broad system with weak controls, deploy a limited system in a low-impact setting with strong monitoring and clear boundaries. That approach preserves learning without gambling with people's lives and opportunities. Ethics that holds up under pressure also depends on culture, because culture determines what happens when nobody is watching. If the culture rewards speed and punishes caution, people will bypass responsible steps. If the culture rewards honest risk reporting and supports redesign, ethics becomes a shared habit. Beginners can recognize ethical culture by listening for phrases like "we need to understand this before we ship," "we should test this on the populations we might harm," and "we need an appeal path if this affects eligibility." They can also recognize unhealthy culture by listening for dismissal, like "nobody will notice," "we can add guardrails later," or "the data team says it is fine." Responsible AI ethics is not about being slow. It is about being deliberate. Deliberate teams ship fast where it is safe and slow where it is risky, and that balance is the heart of sustainable trust. To make all of this feel usable, imagine a system designed to help a school decide which students should receive extra academic support. The ethical goal is supportive, but pressure can push it into harmful territory if the model starts labeling students as low potential or becomes a gatekeeper for opportunities. Responsible AI ethics would ask whether the data reflects unequal access to resources, whether the outputs could stigmatize students, and whether students and families understand what is happening. It would push for minimization so that sensitive personal details are not used when they are not necessary. It would require transparency so that staff can explain the process and students can challenge errors. It would demand accountability so that the system is not treated as an unquestionable authority. This example shows how ethics is not abstract. It is the difference between a helpful tool and a system that quietly reinforces disadvantage. In the end, applying responsible AI ethics that holds up under business pressure means keeping human impact at the center while turning values into decision habits that survive stress. Fairness matters because uneven harm is still harm even when the system looks good on average. Privacy matters because trust collapses when data is reused in surprising ways or collected without restraint. Transparency matters because people cannot protect themselves from decisions they cannot understand. Safety and reliability matter because false confidence and unstable behavior cause real-world damage. Accountability matters because ethics without ownership becomes theater. When you practice these principles as practical questions and decision guardrails, you become harder to rush into risky shortcuts, and you help organizations build AI systems that deserve trust instead of demanding it.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.